What's up, guys? Your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson here, and you might notice this recording sounds different than the usual podcast, and that is because I'm sitting outside here in Lockhart, Texas, recording this ad into my iPhone. It probably sounds pretty crappy. Well, I'm doing this to show you something very cool. Many of you guys know that my production team works over at Podsworth Media, and they've been producing my show for quite a while. I get a lot of questions and people asking, who does your podcast? Why does it sound great? And I'm telling you why. It's because the guys at Podsworth are amazing. They've got this brand new online app for taking rough recordings like this and making them a whole lot cleaner and more listenable with just a few easy clicks. It will remove background noise. It reduces plosives, it fixes clipping, which is distortion from recording with the gain up too high, clipping, which is distortion from recording with the gain up too high, which I can promise you I've done many times, and they fixed this for me. It removes clicks and pops. And then also levels out the dialogue, so there's no crazy where the guest sounds too loud or the interviewer sounds too quiet. Here's what you guys can do, all of y'all that are or audiobooks or anything. If you're a pastor and you want your sermon recorded, whatever the case may be, go to podsworth.com and click Get Started. You drag and drop your audio files or click to open your file manager. This also works on your smartphone's web browser. You customize your settings that you want, but the default works fine on most podcast recordings. Then enter code BUCK50, BUCK 50 for 50% off of your first order. You don't need an account, just an email address and payment. And you'll get a download link in your email for your cleaned up files. How cool is this? The guys at Podsworth run everything they do through this app before they do anything else to it. So all of my recordings go through this app that we're talking about. It works great. Like I said, any spoken word recordings, obviously for podcasts, YouTube videos, sermons, audiobooks, whatever. It will make awful recordings sound listenable and much more professional. So, like I said, go to podsworth.com and click Get Started. You can use promo code BUCK50, BUCK50, for 50% off of your first order. You can use promo code BUCK50, BUCK50, for 50% off of your first order. Let's get it.
You are now listening to the Counterflow podcast, a place for dissonant voices and unapproved opinions.
You get split in half, the icon, the hologram graph, but I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast, rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus, but I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Here is your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson.
What's up, you guys? Welcome back once again to the Counterflow podcast. As always, I am your host and humble narrator, Buck Johnson, coming to you out of Lockhart, Texas. As always, well, wow, last week's episode, I got a lot of, I say this sometimes, a lot of good feedback, and it was good. It was a lot of very personal and special and kind and emotional feedback from that episode with Father Moses McPherson. If you have not listened to that one and you listen to this show on a regular basis, please go check that one out. It was very impactful for not only me, but for a lot of you guys out there. What a great guest and a great person and a great priest Father Moses McPherson is. Again, thank you, Father, for being here. And I know it meant a lot to a lot of people. It was wonderful to get that feedback. I knew I was going to get some good feedback on that one. And again, I say good feedback as a broad term, but it was extra special, let's put it that way. And I'm not being hyperbolic about that. It was really neat. So this one is one I've been looking forward to. She's out there on the circuit, on the speaking circuit. In fact, right after this interview that her and I did, she had one immediately up after that again, because she's got this great new book out. And she is Miriam Grossman MD, Dr. Miriam Grossman. The book, I love this title, Lost in Transnation, a child psychiatrist's guide out of the madness. And we get a lot of good stuff in this. This is a shorter episode than most. I think we go about 40-ish minutes, but there's a lot of impactful things in this one as well, especially if you are a parent. or if you plan to be, let's put it that way. And even if you're none of those things, I think you're going to get a lot out of this one, and we can get to it. I normally don't just read off someone's bio, but hers is really special, and she's a very special lady. She was super kind on the air, but off the air as well. What a great lady. I will tell you now, Miriam Grossman MD is board certified in psychiatry and in the subspecialty of child and adolescent psychiatry. Before gender ideology was on anyone's radar, she warned parents about its falsehoods and dangers in her 2009 book about sexuality education called You're Teaching My Child What? Dr. Grossman's practice currently focuses on gender-distressed young people and their parents. She believes that every child is born in the right body. Imagine that. Dr. Grossman has been vocal about the capture of her profession by ideologues, leading to dangerous and experimental treatments on children and betrayal of parents. I think you're going to find this interview very, very special, very impactful, and very important. And we will get right to it. Miriam Grossman, welcome to the show, ma'am. How are you?
Well, aside from the world being filled with satanic evil, I'm doing fine.
Same here. That's an appropriate way to put it. I'm going to show, I always try to incentivize the people to watch these episodes rather than just listen. So I'm showing the people watching the book, the excellent book that we're going to be discussing throughout this interview, called The Name is wonderful. Lost in Transnation, a child psychiatrist's guide out of the madness. And it's definitely the madness. It's a topic I've looked into here and there, but I have to say there's a lot of crazy things I learned just from this book alone. So as we start, could you give your background? Because I do think that's important to this topic and how you know so much of these things. And then we'll get into what motivated you to write this.
Sure. Well, I am a board certified child and adolescent psychiatrist. I'm a medical doctor. I went to medical school. I did some training in pediatrics, and then I switched to psychiatry, and then I specialized in child and adolescent psychiatry. So I've been practicing child and adolescent and adult psychiatry for almost, well, let's say 35 years. And I've written a bunch of books on different topics. I became aware that my profession, the mental health profession and the medical profession, was, should we say, hijacked, politicized in a very dangerous manner. And I began to write books about that. So I wrote a book called Unprotected. And that was while I was working at UCLA, seeing students, university students. And I recognized that my profession was so bent on promoting certain ideologies and certain lifestyles, and that was harmful to my students, essentially sexual lifestyles. So that was one book, Unprotected. Then I wrote a book about sex education itself and what students are told and not told about sexuality. And that book was called You're Teaching My Child What? Because essentially, sex education is not about sexual health, remaining free of disease. Sex education is about sexual freedom and promoting, again, a lifestyle that is based on momentary pleasure, exploration of all sorts of high-risk behaviors, rejection of traditional Judeo-Christian values, and so on. And then most recently, I became involved in the treatment of kids who are delusional about their gender identity, about whether they are boys or girls. And for the past several years, I've been seeing those kids in my office along with their parents. And out of that experience came my most recent book, Lost in Transnation, in which I educate families about this mass hysteria that our culture is now in and how to protect your children from it.
Do you, just as on a side note, a friend of the show, it seems like you guys must know each other. Do you know Dr. Mark McDonald?
Oh, sure.
Okay. As I started realizing, like, wait, you were at UCLA, you're both child psychiatrists, and he's been on multiple times here. One of the disturbing things, I don't have kids yet, so some of this was kind of catching me off guard as far as the institutions. It should, I sound naive. I shouldn't have been totally caught off guard. But one of the things you wrote in here that's disturbing, to say the least, is for parents, your children's school, pediatricians, and or therapists will be providing basically ideologically driven misinformation. And so I do think even parents that watch this show, which I think are generally more aware of what's going on, this has to be a little bit of a shock. And I've heard parents that I work with say, actually over COVID, when they would have schooling at home, they'd walk by the computer and pause, like, wait, what were they just saying? This is not what I thought my parents, the teachers were teaching and the counselors were counseling. Why on earth? How did this become so insidious and get into schools and pediatricians where they're promoting what's not real anymore, right? It's an ideology, not science. How did this come about?
Well, contrary to what many people think, it did not happen overnight. And I explain in the book that this has been going on for decades. There's been a crusade through our trusted institutions, our medical and mental health institutions, our educational institutions, the government, legal institutions. There's been a crusade, and it was out in the open. It just wasn't, unfortunately, picked up and noticed by many. I mean, I have a chapter in my book, You're Teaching My Child What, which was written in 2009. So 15 years ago. And I have a chapter about gender ideology, warning parents that kids are being told in sex education provided by the major organizations that are funded by our tax dollars, like Planned Parenthood. There's an organization called SECUS, Sexuality Information and Educational Council of the U.S., and other large for-profit institutions that already a long time ago were informing kids that male and female are human social constructs, that actually there's many choices when it comes to sex, not just male and female, that there's actually a spectrum and that people can fall anywhere along that spectrum and so on and so forth. And it's completely normal to reject your biology. It's completely normal to wish to have organs removed and so on. So this is going on a long time. In terms of how it happened, I mean, I can tell you, for example, that take the American Academy of Pediatrics, which is the flagship professional organization of pediatricians. They claim to have 67,000 members. Now, they, as long ago as 20 years ago, were already already there were activists in that organization that were very loud and very clear in their agendas, and they wished to push certain values into that organization, such as the right of adolescents to get abortions without parental consent, the right of adolescents to get contraceptives without parental consent, and so on and so forth. The values that go against the ideal of the nuclear family. And I say that because it's an ideal to be raised by your biological mother and father. And that is clearly all things being equal, the best for our children. Whereas the American Academy of Pediatrics, already a long time ago, was promoting the idea that you could have all sorts of families, 2 moms, 2 dads, and it's all equal. It's all the same in terms of the outcome for the child. And so this is an organization, the American Academy of Pediatrics, that was essentially taken over. And when it comes to their policies about transgenderism, it's the same thing, and it's really quite blatant. They came out with a policy statement in 2018 that was written by only one person. The thing is that these policy statements, when they are published, people are under the impression, and the association itself allows and wants that to happen, apparently, that there is a consensus. There's a policy statement from the American Academy of Pediatrics that is endorsing from A to Z the whole belief system about transgenderism, and you can be born in the wrong body, and there's many different genders, and we just have to put the child in the driver's seat and listen to what the child wants and do all the new name, the new pronouns, the puberty blockers, and so on and so forth, if that's what the child wants. So this is what came out in their policy statement, again, written by one pediatrician, Jason Rafferty, and people are led to believe, parents are led to believe that this policy statement means that the entirety of the American Academy of Pediatrics stands behind it. And not only that, but I want to point out that the pediatricians, the rank and file pediatricians who are not activists, who are working day in and day out to help their patients, they rely on their professional organization, the American Academy of Pediatrics, to come out with guidance on different issues.
Mm-hmm.
Just like myself as a child psychiatrist. If I want the latest about, for example, let's see, OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, I'm not going to take an entire day to, go into a medical library and search out all the recent research and everything that's been done recently and the new medications and so on and so forth. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the website of the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, and I'm going to go to OCD and see how they're guiding me. And I'm going to trust them. Why shouldn't I trust them? The thing is, as I explained in the book, we can no longer, as doctors, trust when it comes to certain issues, such as the transgender issue. We cannot trust our professional associations. We simply can't. So when families take their children to the pediatrician, and they have every reason to trust the pediatrician, and if it's an older kid, like an early adolescent or an adolescent, and the pediatrician says to the parent, I want to speak to your child privately now. Could you please step out? And the parent is naive and trusting, and, the parent steps out for a few minutes. Well, what's going on? I'll tell you what's going on during those few minutes. The pediatrician is going to ask questions like, do you have sex with boys, girls, or both? Do you identify as a girl or a boy? Are you uncomfortable with your identity, with your genitals? Are you feeling like you may have been born in the wrong body? Do you have a different name and pronouns that I should know about? And so all of this is done behind the backs of the parents. And the reason for that is because, again, these activists within the organization have pushed their agenda that says parents cannot be trusted. We know better what's good for kids than parents sometimes. when it comes to a kid's sexuality, sexual behavior, gender identity, we know better. And so we need to reach the child outside of the parent's influence. And I am telling parents to not step out of the room.
Right.
And that if that's an issue with the pediatrician, they need to walk away.
Yes.
And find somebody else to take care of their children.
Yes. Well put. We have to talk about a gentleman I was also not familiar with until I read your book. Ironically, my girlfriend is a twin, and I was reading and studying your book while I was with them last week. And so they were very familiar, being twins, who John Money is, because that the story we're about to get into is, I suppose, circulated through circles of twins because of how horrific what he did was. But I do want my listeners to understand this man and how terrible his main idea was. We can say ideas, plural at this point, I believe. But can you explain who he is? And then we'll get into this original idea, because that kind of planted so many seeds to where we're at now, unfortunately.
Yes, that's correct. The entire edifice, this whole structure of gender identity separate from biology, is based on John Money's experiment. So before I get into it, I'll explain why it's so important for parents to understand. John Money proposed that that biology and identity were two separate things. That biology, that babies are born like a blank slate, and they could be raised as either boys or girls. That was his theory in the 50s. And he, in order to prove his theory, let's put it, proving that theory that you could raise a boy as a girl or a girl as a boy would have been nearly impossible, right? How do you do that? But as luck would have it, a family did arrive in his office upon whom he could impose this terrible experiment. What happened is that twin boys were born, a Canadian family, a young blue-collar family, and during one of the twins' circumcision, his penis was burnt off. The equipment was faulty. His penis was burnt off. The parents, of course, were devastated and at a loss of what to do. They heard about John Money down in Johns Hopkins University. This is in the 60s, the late 60s. And they heard him make the claim that a boy could be raised as a girl as long as it starts before the age of 3, because John Money's theory explained that before the age of 3, there still is the opportunity to affect and change the child's self-perception as being male or female. But after the age of 3, he said that was fixed. And he proposed that all of it came externally from society, from the parents, how they treated the child, whether they, the blue or the pink blanket, what kind of toys the kid was given, the expectations that were placed on the child as a boy or a girl, expectations for behavior, and so on. So John Money said it was all from outside. None of it was internal. None of it was biology. Of course, there were some differences. There were some anatomical differences between male and female. But other than that, John Money said everything is due to society. It's all created by culture, the differences between male and female. So this family, the Reamers, they went down to Baltimore. They, at that time, considered John Money to be like a godlike figure. Okay, he was extremely sophisticated, successful. He was very well spoken. He had a PhD. He was in charge of an internationally known clinic. So they would have done whatever he told them. And he told them, take your baby boy and we will castrate him. In other words, remove his testicles, because up to that point, it was just his penis that had been burnt off. And then after we castrate him, you'll take him home, give him a girl's name, tell everybody that he's a girl, dress him in girls' clothing, give him dolls, and so on and so on. So he would be raised, and they went and did all of that. He was raised alongside his brother, with neither he or his brother were aware of what had happened. And so for many years, Brenda, the boy was renamed Brenda. And he was treated as if he was a girl. He was called Brenda. He was dressed as a girl. He was given girls' stereotypical clothing and so on. Now, John Money, I'll just add that John Money had his own reasons for this theory. John Money was raised by a father who was a out of control alcoholic who used to beat him and his mother. He was filled with rage, and he took it out on those weaker than him. John Money, at a certain point, wrote about how uncomfortable he was being male. He wrote about how he regarded his genitalia as being vile. So he himself had what we would call today gender dysphoria. And so with his theory that it doesn't matter what your genitals are, it doesn't matter what your biology is, you didn't have to identify in that way. If you have male genitalia and XY chromosomes, for him, it was an answer. He didn't have to be like his father. It was a solution for him. So he had his own psychological reasons for promoting this theory. And when the twins were 5 or 6 years old, he announced to the world that his experiment was a complete success, and that the child was living happily as a girl, doing well, thriving, not having problems, perhaps was a bit of a tomboy, but in every other way was doing well. And every year, the twins were taken down to John Money to see him, to have a checkup. And every year, he continued to report that they were just doing very, very well. But the truth came out. The truth came out when Brenda was about 14, that actually Brenda had not been doing well at all. The experiment was not a success. Brenda was so masculine in her or his behaviors and preferences. Brenda preferred her brother's toys, always preferred rough and tumble play, was aggressive, was athletic, was always getting into fights, even more than his brother, was not accepted socially at all because of his overwhelmingly masculine demeanor, did not fit in socially, didn't have friends. It really was just a disaster. Hated himself. And by the time he was 13 or 14 and had entered puberty and had been placed on estrogen in order to grow breasts, Brenda realized that he was attracted to girls, and he became suicidal. And his psychiatrist at the time told his parents that they must tell him the truth. And so, and I should say that John Money had warned them to never do that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, John Money told the parents, you must never tell the twins the truth. So they went ahead and told them, and Brenda immediately felt incredible relief to know that, and at once took the name David.
Mm-hmm.
So David felt so relieved to know that he wasn't crazy and that he really was a boy. He felt that he was a boy. He immediately stopped taking the estrogen. He actually needed to have surgery to remove the growth that had occurred in his breast. And he continued to live his life as a male. He ended up having multiple surgeries on his genitals. He got married. He married a woman with 3 children who he adopted. And, what can I say? He continued to struggle, and very sadly, he ended up committing suicide. His twin also died of a overdose. Now, John Money single-handedly destroyed this family.
Yes.
That's one. He had been sexually abusing the kids as well when they
Yes. Incredible.
Yeah. Well, he was pro pedophilia, pro incest. So this was a deeply immoral and disturbed man who, by the way, is still to this day
Yep.
honored and elevated by certain portions of the mental health, profession, psychology. But so there's many lessons to be learned from the John Money story, and I would advise everybody who's interested in this to read the book written about it called "As Nature Made Him." The boy who was raised as a girl by John Colapinto. But the bottom line, that the point that I want to make right now is that, you see, because John Money falsely claimed that this experiment had been a success, and for decades this idea was promoted, and even, you could say, became doctrine. It became institutionalized within psychology, within sociology, medicine, gender studies. It became doctrine. People believed this to be a fact, that the experiment had been a success, because David didn't come forward with the truth until the late 90s.
Right.
And he only came forward when he heard that the experiment with him and his brother had been hailed as a complete success by Dr. Money. He didn't know that. He had no idea that his life and that what happened in his family was being presented to the world as a success, a resounding success. And when he heard that other little boys, other infants and children were also being castrated and raised as girls, he was extremely upset about it, and he decided to go public. But unfortunately, it was too late. And also, unfortunately, most people never heard of this story.
Right.
They've heard instead that there's this thing called gender identity, which is completely separate from biology, and that we can deny biology without paying a price. Now, clearly, David Reamer was a boy from before he was born.
Right.
And his brain and the rest of his body and all of his systems had been masculinized during pregnancy. And we know that now. We know the science, and we know that starting at 8 weeks after conception, when some women don't even realize that they're pregnant, when the embryo is, like the size of a lima bean, we know that testosterone in boys begins to be secreted and it travels to the brain.
Mm-hmm.
So John Money's theory was garbage. And what we have now with the mass hysteria and mass delusion of gender identity, that you can be someone that your biology says you're not, is all based on that bogus theory. And that's why it's so important for people to know about it. And I start my book with the story of John.
I know a lot of you guys want to see more beauty in this world, in this culture, because modern art is so degenerate and nihilistic. It does seem that there's a huge need to share the beautiful Christian art. Some artists are working to keep tradition alive. My good friend and friend of the show, Amy Mastrini, Amy the artist, she's been painting for 11 years. She's an Orthodox Christian. She creates icons of Jesus Christ, Mary, the saints, and so on. Her work is done in oil and gold leaf. It's really, really nice. I have some pieces from Amy. It's the perfect opportunity to beautify your home or give a gift to your loved ones for a holiday or a birthday. She sells art prints, stickers, original paintings on her website. Go check it out, amy-the-artist.com. That is amy-the-artist.com. She is currently accepting commissions as well. She says a lot of her work is intended to honor the divine and sacred. How wonderful is that? Go check it out, amy-the-artist.com. Follow her on Instagram at amy_the_artist. Let's get back to the show. I assume, well, after reading your book, I do, but I want to get this out there on the record because it's so politicized these days. Is there any legitimate hard science to point to this trans argument being real? Or is this purely political? I actually call it a secular religion at points. Is there any hard science that they can use on the quote unquote their side of this?
Okay, when you say hard science, do you mean like evidence that the brain is actually different, that a boy's brain can be in a girl's body, that sort of thing?
Just is there any scientific proof, I'll say, for lack of a better phrase, that, let's say me, I can be born in the wrong body?
No.
I guess that's the best way to phrase this.
No, there certainly is not. What we do know and have always known for about 100 years now is that there are rare individuals, extremely rare, one in many tens of thousands, who have an emotional disorder of experiencing their body as being wrong. And it's a debilitating disorder. And these people deserve our compassion and deserve whatever treatment may be right for them. And might there be instances in which these individuals cope better with their condition after receiving medical treatment? Yes, those individuals do exist. I will acknowledge that they exist, but they are extremely rare. And we have no way of identifying which of them is going to benefit from the medical interventions and which are not. But this is a totally different population that we're dealing with right now. Right now, the epidemic of delusions over gender identity is not at all those individuals who have what we used to call gender identity disorder, the one in tens of thousands of people. This is a different population of kids that always felt fine with their bodies until they hit early adolescence or young adulthood, and they start hearing about the possibility. They hear about it. They're drawn into it online on websites and social media and YouTube videos and groomers that are out there, or they hear about it at school because it's become, like a civil rights issue. And they hear about discrimination against this, gender minority. And they hear about it through the LGBT groups. And many of my patients have first heard about the idea of being transgender at school from a guidance counselor, from friends of theirs. And that's why you see parents have to understand it's a social contagion. So kids, this is happening in clusters.
Yes.
So if you look at, a community, and you look at the different, the kids that are coming out as transgender, we're not seeing like one in one school, one in another school across town, and then one, in somewhere in the suburbs or something. No, we're seeing clusters. We're seeing groups of friends in the same class sometimes. In the same class, they all know each other, coming out together as being transgender.
Okay.
So there's a contagion,
right.
A social contagion.
Yeah, I've just having this discussion with someone. I said, we're beyond this at this point, but without the internet, I think this would be a much, much smaller problem because there's so much of this online, and it's become weird. Like, it's like you're accepted more so if you would come out like this is not only like normalized, but extra. It's like you're extra cool. I've seen these things. It's almost trendy at this point. The sad thing is, and you point this out, and I'll get you out of here pretty quickly here. These ideas have a body count is what's sad about this, and it's rising, as you point out. And I've noticed there's this false notion of what quote unquote love is and how to approach this topic. And to a lot of people, love just means accepting everyone no matter what happens. And it's just it's your own reality kind of thing. It's this relativism, this postmodern thing. And I feel that that's not necessarily Christian love, but it's got to be a tricky situation for a parent who does love their child, and their child comes to them. This is kind of, we discussed how it started in the 90s and this guy's ideas in the 50s, but it is kind of new for parenting, I think, for this to be so trendy amongst kids. What advice, I suppose, would you have? And I know it could be different if the kid's 8 versus if the kid's 17. What advice do you have for parents? This has got to be such a struggle. And like, I keep equating it. I'm heavily tattooed, and I think I would never, if my child of 11 years old came and said, I think I identify as a tattooed person, I need some, I wouldn't go get them tattooed. But there's parents that are like, okay, let's get your genitals changed or something like that. What advice would you have for parents on a situation like this?
Okay, well, of course, that's why I wrote the book. The book is really one big manual of advice. But I would say, first of all, that what I want for families is for them never to reach that point in which the child is going to come and say, I'm really not a girl, I'm a boy. I'm not a boy, I'm a girl. I am advising parents to start really early with their kids. And I mean early. For example, it's not too early to tell your preschooler, let's say, that to explain that, you're a girl, you were always a girl. You were a girl from the moment that you were first created. Okay, you're not a girl because the doctor said you're a girl when I delivered you.
Right.
And the doctor has nothing to do with it. You see, I want kids to recognize these falsehoods when they hear sex assigned at birth.
Yes.
When kids hear that, when they get out of the house a little bit, or they're hearing it, on wherever it is that they may hear it, I want them to recognize and say, like, huh? No.
Yes.
No,
yes.
right.
I'm still wishing adults would recognize that. I've literally had adults tell me, no, a sign of birth is a real thing. It's like, oh my God, it's nuts.
Okay, well, it's only a real thing in the 0.02% of births in which the genitalia are ambiguous and not normal. That's an extremely rare situation.
Hermaphrodites.
What they've done is they've taken that phrase assigned at birth, and they've and this is evil, I mean, and they've applied it to everybody as if everybody's sex is assigned at birth. So I want children to understand that sex is established at conception. And that's what I said, by the way. I testified in Congress a few months ago about this, and I emphasized that sex is not assigned at birth. Sex is established permanently at conception. So one of the things that parents can do, is make sure that their child understands that it's permanent. It can't be changed. Now, kids also need to understand that there's no one way to be a boy or a girl. There's many different kinds of boys and girls. And don't let anyone ever try to convince you that because you're a boy who's not athletic and, isn't into building things and cars and basketball and all the stereotypical stuff, just because you may like other things that are considered more stereotypically. I mean, don't you hate these stereotypes? But that's what this is based on. It's based on stereotypes.
Mm-hmm.
You want your child to understand that no one should ever try and suggest that because you don't fit in the box and because you might be just, somewhat different than most of the boys in your class, boys that you might have different, whatever it is, it doesn't mean you're not a boy. And I want parents to also understand that you may not have, the stereotypically girly girl that you always thought you were going to give birth to, or the stereotypical masculine boy. So you have to be ready in your own mind to accept whoever it is that, whoever your child is, and to celebrate that. That's important as well. Now, there's so much that parents can do. And what I have in the book actually is I have the results of a survey that I conducted among parents that are currently dealing with this issue now in their family or did deal with it. And I asked them, if you could give advice to families who might deal with this in the future, what would you advise them? And I got 500 responses from 17 countries around the world. And they were quite consistent in their advice. And they said, number one, teach your child early about gender, about male and female. Number two, be very vigilant about schools and about who your child is talking to. You have to get control of your child's internet use. I have an appendix in the book that deals specifically with getting you. There is no debate. You have to be in control of your child's internet use. Trust me, there are groomers. They're just waiting patiently for your child to come onto a chat room or come onto some social media, and they will eagerly try and influence your child. So you have to get control of the internet. The best thing, of course, is homeschooling. Not everyone can do that, but for the people that can, that is the ideal. You want to be aware, of course, of the providers in your life, the doctors, the pediatricians, any therapists that you may want to take your child to for a non-related issue, like ADHD or depression or whatever it is. And I have another appendix on how to find a proper therapist. And you can't assume it's not going to happen in your family.
Yes. Or your small town. I've seen it firsthand. Someone go, well, that's the big city schools, not these small schools where my kid goes. I've seen that happen in small town schools.
Absolutely. Yeah. No family is immune. And I've seen, the most, families with excellent values, Judeo-Christian values. Although honestly, to be accurate, most of the families that I say are very secular and very liberal.
Yes.
And so the child is all the more so shocked when they come to their parent and say, I'm transgender, I want puberty blockers, and the parent doesn't get on board. The child has been indoctrinated to think that a reaction of hesitation or caution means the person is intolerant,
Yes.
biased, and toxic.
Right.
So this is the other thing, that once your child is indoctrinated, you see, this destroys families. This
Yes.
destroys relationships.
Yes. Sad. It's sad. And I want to show everyone this book because I truly think what you're doing is heroic. And I mean that. My listeners know I'm a firefighter, and people say, well, y'all are heroes. Maybe so on a very small level, but if this gets out worldwide, I think what you're doing is heroic. Do you have anything you can plug? Of course, we're going to want people to buy this book, but anything else?
Yeah. I'll plug, first of all, the fact that there's an audio version which I narrated. I couldn't believe it, but I never considered myself as someone that would narrate a book for audio, but I was convinced to do it, and I'm so glad I did. And I really put my heart and soul into it. So for people that don't or can't sit down and read a 300-page book, you can get the audio version. The other thing I would plug is my website, which is Miriam Grossman MD.com. And there's just a ton of stuff there. My testimony in Congress, different interviews, videos. There's a link to the interview that I did with Jordan Peterson. By the way, Dr. Peterson wrote the foreword to my book. Very grateful for him for doing that. So yeah, get educated. It doesn't matter the age of your child. You need to know about this stuff. Don't become victims. I don't want to see you in my office.
Yes, well said. Thank you so much for this book, for the work you do, and for coming here onto the show on Counterflow. Thank you, Miriam Grossman.
You're welcome.
What a lady. What a great guest. What a special lady, and what a hero. I really mean that. She's doing some heroic stuff. So go get this book. It's good. And if you do the Audible thing, like she said, it's her narrating the audiobook version. And I will say, even though some of my friends listening to this right now do narrate audiobooks quite beautifully, I love it when the author of the book is the narrator of the audiobook, because they have these inflections that they understand where certain things should be. And it's just special. So if you do the Audible thing, go get it on audiobook and listen to it. And it'll be like a little companion to this episode here. As for this show, we will be doing I've already got the guest for our special monthly Zoom meeting. Should I give any spoilers? Let's see. He's been on this show. He is Orthodox. He is a priest. And there's your spoiler, as much as I'll give you. To join up, if you're not already a part of this special club, just go to patreon.com/counterflow. $5 or more per month get you in the club, and you get to be a part of these monthly Zoom meetings that we do. I always tell you this, but just so you remember, they're not recorded, they're not posted, it's all private, and no one is listening but my guest, me, you guys, and the deep state. So there we go. And follow me on Twitter at BuckRebel, BuckRebel. Counterflowpodcast.com is the website. Subscribe to the YouTube page so you can get these notifications and watch these episodes premiere live every Tuesday night around 7 p.m. Central Time. I say around, sometimes it's 7:30, sometimes it's 8. But if you just subscribe to the page, you'll get the notifications and you don't have to worry about, wait, what time is it this week? So do that, and until next week, I'll see you guys soon.
You get split in half, but I call him the hologram brass. But I am the center inside the placenta of math. You clash with cyanide gas and die fast. Rhythmical equivalent of solids, liquid, and gas. We smash your sinus with the power of Lord Titus. But I am the virus inside of the iris of Cyrus.
Like the sound of the Counterflow podcast? Our audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.